Good afternoon, everybody. Welcome back to Hobbit Immersion Camp. It is, what is today? Wednesday. It is Wednesday, day 8. And today we begin to look at the aftermath of the death of the dragon. And this is a really fascinating moment in the Hobbit story because, of course, as you'll remember, in Chapter 1, they set off to, the whole goal. If you think back to the dwarves' song that they sang in Bag End back in Chapter 1, the whole point was, right, we must away our break of day to seek our pale enchanted gold, right? They want to get their gold and they want to reclaim their harps and gold from him, right, from the dragon. Thorin says, they want to recover their own and bring their curses home on the dragon if they can. Well, it seems like everything's done, right? They've got the treasure. The dragon's dead, right? The curses have been brought home. Everything is good now, right? And so this is where the story gets a little unexpected, right? So I'm looking forward to discussing this unexpected turn with you guys here today. So, without further ado, I'll hand you off to Ms. Binkley.
Good evening, good morning, good afternoon, wherever you are. Welcome. And today we have some really exciting chapters. We're going to see kind of some things like Professor Olson was just talking about, kind of some little twists and changes and some surprises. And once again, if you haven't been able to keep up with the reading, this is a pretty fast class. So if you haven't been able to keep up with the reading, that's just fine. Just follow along with today's talk. And if things pop up while we're talking about it, do ask your questions for those, for anything that we're talking about. So we're going to start off looking at some maps. Yesterday, we had some questions about locations. The Withered Heath came up and Gundabad came up. And then also, where are the Iron Hills? Now, on this map that we've been following along, Bilbo and the company's journey all the way across Middle Earth to get to the Lonely Mountain, we always start off our talking about how we started here in Hobbiton and they went down this great east road. Remember, their plan was to follow it all the way to the River Running and then go to the Lonely Mountain. Well, they had some things that happened along the way. They had the troll adventure. They got to Rivendell, found the moon letters. Then they tried to go over hill, but ended up going under hill in the goblin tunnels. They were rescued by the eagles and dropped off here at the Carrock. Then they met up with Beorn, followed the path, got captured by the elves, escaped the elves in the barrels, went to Esgaroth, Lake Town, and they welcomed them there. They gave them all the supplies, remember, they needed in order to go and carry this adventure further because they were trying to get to the Lonely Mountain to bring their vengeance back to Smaug. So we do have the Withered Heath up here, and that we talked about that, about heath being a low kind of scrubby plant, and withered, well, if you're hanging out with dragons, especially if they're fire drakes, they're probably withering things. But I pulled in a couple of more maps. This one here is actually from my book, the book that I'm reading. It's on page 174 to 175. And if you take a look down here, this is not a map by Tolkien. If you look here, you'll see that there's a C in this monogram. And that is a map by his son, Christopher. So he is the one who took all of this information and turned it into the map. And one of the things I really like about this map is look at this straight line here on the side. By golly, that is the edge of the wild. There is no two ways about it. There is a line there. That's it. That's the edge of the wild. It's not wild on this side. It is wild on this side. And I really like that straight line. There is no doubt about that. Elrond's home here is in Rivendell, just to kind of get our heads wrapped around where this map is. And then all the way up here in the north of the Misty Mountains is Gundabad. And we will be talking about Gundabad tomorrow. So I'm just pointing out where that is located. Here is the Great River. Here's the Carrock. Here's where Beorn lived. Up in here is the elf path. And notice the spider webs. Isn't that creepy? So anyway, we have our Elven King's Halls and so on. And you'll notice here with this little arrow, it says Iron Hills. So they are actually off this map. They're even further to the east. But this particular map, if you do have it in your book, or if you get a different edition of the book and find the map, it's really a fascinating map to take a look at. They just call it Wilderland. And you can look and see all these things here and how the forest is drawn. Isn't this just interesting? And there's a little building down here. Then there's mountains of Mirkwood in here, and you can see the enchanted river that Bomber fell into. And just has all sorts of wonderful detail on it. And then it also shows the desolation of Smaug, which actually kind of took over everything there because he was quite mean. But now I have another map that I'm going to share with you. I will tell you right now, I don't know where I found this map. I have had this map on my computer, on a computer of mine, for probably 15 years. And I did not get a note on there about where I acquired the map online. There are lots and lots of maps online. And I usually like to show people where I found this because somebody drew this map, but I don't know who it was because I never wrote it down. So don't do that. Keep track of where you find your information. So let's take a look at this next map. This one here is more of Middle Earth, but we're going to concentrate on these parts up here that match our story. So you can see that we're kind of we're stepping out a little bit further, a little bit further. The map is showing more and more and more area here. So over here is Hobbiton, okay? See this little square here? Whoever drew this map of Middle Earth made a little square box here for Hobbiton. And you can see this dotted line is the Great East Road. And you're familiar with that now because we've been studying the travels on the map. Rivendell, Misty Mountains. Up here is Gundabad. We looked at that one. And here is Erebor. Remember, they could not take the East Road. And if you look carefully, we do not find the forest path on this map at all. This map is more focused, I think, on the entirety of the Lord of the Rings. It's not so much focused on the Hobbit. So some of the things that we've been studying and talking about aren't on this map. But I pulled this one up because it shows you where the Iron Hills are. And that question came up yesterday. Where were the Iron Hills? And this is where Dane is hanging out. And that is we're going to be talking about Dane and the Iron Hills. So I thought it would be a good thing to have. In our, kind of our mental map as we're going through so that we can kind of understand where people are coming from and where people are going to. Once again, here's the Elven King Halls. Esgaroth is here. And if you take a look back, and it won't go back, of course. Sometimes it goes back, sometimes it doesn't. Let's see if I can get it. There we go. I finally got it to come back. If you take a look at this one from the Hobbit book, you can see we get a lot more detail and a lot more information about the Elven King's Halls being here. And here is Esgaroth on the Long Lake, and the Iron Hills are just mentioned in the book, so it's not really there. So let's go ahead and move to our chapter. Today we're going to be looking at chapter 15, The Gathering of the Clouds. Now when you read this title, you might think to yourself, clouds like rain clouds, or clouds blocking the sunshine, or clouds of other things. So let's see what's happening here. So what we are going to do, remember, we're going to talk some more about things that happen in literature. Yesterday we talked about a flashback. What we did was we followed the dwarves, the company through, and the story stopped. And then the story went back to Lake Town and told you what happened and brought the story forward to the time where the dwarves were. Then the story went on. And now what we're going to do is hop back and follow the company's story again until our two stories meet together. So it's kind of like a long road that divided, and one part goes ahead and the other part stays, and then this part goes ahead, and then they both come back together, and the story continues on. So the story is back with Bilbo and the company. Remember that they had gone to the lookout, and they were keeping a watch. What were they watching for? Remember, they didn't know where Smaug was, and they were hoping that Smaug was going to come. They would be able to see from there if Smaug was coming back. And then they could, I guess, take evasive action or do whatever they would do if Smaug came back. But what came back instead was the thrush. And the thrush comes back, and he seems to be trying to talk to the company. And Balin says, I think he's trying to tell us something. And he turns to Bilbo and says, Bilbo, can you understand what he's saying? And Bilbo's going like, oh, he's talking awful fast for me. But Bilbo's thinking like, I don't have a clue what that bird is saying. And then the bird there, is still listening to him and, trying to communicate with them because he has something to say. And then Balin says, boy, I wish this thrush was a raven because dwarves and ravens are good buddies and they can talk to each other. And then he goes on to tell Bilbo about the fact that there was a raven there when Thorin and Thrain were there under the mountain, when Balin and Thorin were young. And his name was Kark, and Kark and his wife was unnamed, said they were friends there. And so before long, I'll go ahead and read this now. Before long, there was a fluttering of wings, and back came the thrush. And with him came a most decrepit old bird. He was getting blind, he could hardly fly, and the top of his head was bald. He was an aged raven of great size. Now, ravens are really common in Alaska, and they're a pretty big bird. A crow is like this, but a raven is a really, really big bird, and they're extremely intelligent and very crafty as well. So he lands there, and he says, I am Roach, son of Kark. So this is Kark's son, but he's really, really, really old. So Kark has died a long time ago, and Roach is here now. So ravens can talk with the dwarves, and Bilbo all of a sudden notices that Roach isn't using bird language, he's just speaking regular language, and so Bilbo can understand what he's saying as well. Okay, we have a couple of questions. Where did the enchanted river come from? Well, if we look on the map, it is flowing through the woods, and it ends up in the river that goes past the Elven King's halls. And remember Beorn said there was an enchantment on the river, but it's not really mentioned what the enchantment comes from. Is that a defense that is put there by the elves to protect their territory? Is it something? Remember, Mirkwood was a creepy place. Was it something in the wood itself that enchanted the river? One of the things that makes me think that it might have been the elves who enchanted the river as a defense was that when Bomber woke up, remember Bomber's the one who fell in? When he woke up, he was dreaming about the elven parties and all the wonderful food that they had. And he didn't want to wake up, especially when he found out there was no food. So that kind of leads me to think that it's something that the elves have enchanted. Did ravens talk to all dwarves or just the king and maybe his family? That's a very good question. I don't think that all of the dwarves in the company were royalty. Excuse me, I have a buzzer here, so I'm going to go open the door. And Dr. Olson, do you want to talk a little bit maybe about the Enchanted River?
Absolutely.
Do you agree with me on that one?
Yeah, it is really unclear. There are two facts about it, right, that you have to remember. One is that it is the magic of it makes Bomber have dreams about the Elven King, right? He dreams dreams which are not only dreams about elves, but they're dreams about elves that kind of come true, right? He describes the Woodland King and the feasts, and that's long before they actually meet them, right? Then later on, they actually come to the places where the Elven King and his people are, in fact, out there feasting in the woods, right? And it's like Bomber's dreams have come true. So it seems to be an elvish dream, so you would think the enchantment comes from the elves, right? But at the same time, the river's black, which seems like a bad thing, right? And we already have sort of hints from earlier on in the story that this forest, Mirkwood, is as dark as it is, and everything in it is as black as it is because something bad is happening to it, right? That's not the natural way that the forest was. The enchanted river is kind of a mystery, therefore. It seems to have elvish magic on it, and it crosses the elvish path, but it is black, and it comes from those mountains, as we could see on the map that Christopher Tolkien drew. It comes from those mountains which are down by where Christopher drew the spiders on the map too. So it seems to come out. It has its source in what looks like some pretty nasty places down there in Mirkwood. So it's not really clear to me. I think there are a couple different ways that we can think about it, and it seems like maybe it is a kind of boundary, right, where you can see some dark magic at work, but also elvish magic, and maybe it's a kind of place where they meet or something. I'm not really sure, but it's a really interesting kind of question, I think.
I think it's something that you can really think about it. Remember, this was called Greenwood the Great before, when the elves was living there. So it could easily be something that the elves had enchanted to start with, and then the enchantment got twisted.
Yeah, that seems very likely.
Very fascinating question. I'm going to go ahead and talk a little bit more about the ravens talking to all dwarves, just the king and maybe his family, because I find that a really interesting question as well. Because as I was saying, I don't think all of the dwarves in the company were royalty. Some of them were just people who came along on the adventure. And if you look at the family trees I think they're in the appendices of the Lord of the Rings, you can see that some of them are not related to the royal family. But Tolkien does not mention in here that nobody else could understand it. So I found that's kind of an interesting question. I'd never really thought about. Maybe only the royalty could understand the ravens. Caden has a question about how we say the dragon's name. The dragon's name is Smaug. The AU is a blend that makes that, like whenever you like stub your toe and you yell, ow, that's the sound it makes in the English language. So whenever you see his name, the AU, you're going to think, ow, I stubbed my toe, and read it as Smaug. It's not smog, like the dirty air kind of thing, although I bet you he could create a lot of smog. So the next question we have here is from Jubilee. Jubilee is wondering, what was the size of the ancient raven breed, such as Kark and his wife along with his son? Ravens, they don't mention these as being really large birds, like the eagles. Remember the great eagles? They were big enough to carry humans. However, the ravens are just regular sized birds from my understanding of the reading, because it's not mentioned that they're super, super large, Jubilee. But ravens are a bigger bird. A crow is a smaller bird. Crows and ravens are related, but a raven is a really big bird. The next question we have here is from Amy, and she's wondering that since Smaug is very large and could crush all of Lake Town, could the people of Esgaroth use his meat as food since he's so large? Well, Amy, the people would not even go near. They would not even go to where the old town was, because Smaug did crash down on Lake Town and destroyed it. And it says specifically in the book that people would not rebuild in that area. They would not even go to that area, because remember, Smaug was encrusted with jewels as part of his armor. They wouldn't even go there to get the jewels. It's like, no, we're not going to do this. No. So no food for them from the dragon. Joshua is wondering if any other things Can any other things talk with other birds? Um, there is a mention of Gandalf being able to understand birds, and there is a mention, but also remember he could understand the wargs when they were trapped in the trees. He could tell what the wargs were talking about. And there is a mention of another wizard whenever you read The Lord of the Rings, that he's just mentioned in passing. He and Gandalf meet for a short amount of time, and Gandalf says to the other wizard, Radagast, he says to him, please send messages to all of your friends who are animals that we are going to be in need of help. And Radagast does that. So other peoples can talk to animals. And Jubilee has a very interesting question, Jubilee. I guess I didn't make that clear. Was Christopher Tolkien the son or the brother to J.R.R. Tolkien? Christopher Tolkien was his son. And they, remember that Tolkien wrote this story and created this story as a bedtime story for his children. And Christopher was one of his children. So as the book is being written and so on, Christopher is actually, listening to his dad talk about, whenever you're writing something, you share it with your friends. Well, he was sharing it with his family and with his friends. And Christopher was a person who really liked drawing maps, I think. And so he just drew some maps to go along with the story. And I love the maps, incidentally. I'm so glad that he did that. And Sebastian is wondering, can I show you some of the drawings that I have made? Sebastian, that's a very interesting question. I don't actually have anything scanned into this computer that I could share with you. And since I am in Rome and don't have any way to actually scan and upload things, not without seeking out a business that does that, I'll have to keep that in mind. And the next time I teach a class, I'll include some of my own sketches because it's fun to do. Well, let's go ahead and talk about what happens next. Now that Roach has arrived and announced who he is, it's not giving me back there we go. Wasn't giving me back my control. So, what Roach has to tell them is Smaug is dead. Word has gone out. Now, Tolkien mentions that the birds are spreading the word, and it's not just the thrush, and it's not just the ravens. It's all kinds of birds. It's like the gossip is going around, and that the story of Smaug's death has been passed by word of mouth. It's spread all the way across Mirkwood because Beorn has even heard about this. The goblins have heard about this. Smaug is dead, and the word is out. I do want to point out here on these pictures here, make sure that you see the little thrush here and this one here. I love this. The thrush is up here. Remember, he was a very black thrush. So anyway, they find out now that Smaug is dead, and then Roach tells them the treasure is yours for the moment. And then he breaks the word to them that the Elven King is on his way, because everybody assumes the dwarves are dead. I mean, like the dragon could easily wipe out this company of 13 dwarves and 1 hobbit quite easily, but he didn't. So everybody thinks the dwarves are dead. So now there's this big mountain of treasure that everybody is wanting to come get. And the Elven King is coming. And the people of Lake Town are kind of blaming the dwarves for this because, like the dwarves came to their town, had nothing. I mean, they were all soggy, and the town took them in and provided them with supplies to go off on this adventure. So they're blaming the dwarves. The dwarves caused this and wiped out our town. We're going to go get some of that treasure, and we're going to rebuild. And this kind of irritates Thorin. And if you look at this picture here, this being Thorin with the blue hood, he does not look like a happy camper here when he hears this news. Look how he has his arms crossed, and he looks angry. And then if you look at this one over here that Mr. Howe drew, he is looking at the bird and he looks like he is really giving it some deep thought. So what he says, what Thorin says to Roach is he wants him to go, especially to his cousin Dane in the Iron Hills, for he has many people well armed and dwells nearest to this place. Bid him hasten. So Thorin wants to increase, there's only 13 of them there, plus Bilbo, and they don't have an awful lot of food left over. How are they going to defend this from, like the entire Elven King and the entire population of Lake Town? Really? So he needs help if he's going to defend this. And Thorin says he's not going to share this with anyone. This is his treasure. Well, this is one of the problems whenever a dragon has laid on treasure for a really long time. It gives us this dragon sickness about it. And whenever you're exposed to that, it kind of poisons your outlook on life. Remember, Thorin was not a bad guy. Really, he wasn't. But he has changed now. He wants this whole treasure. He wants all of it. Nobody gets anything except me. So even though he's heard about the sorrow of Lake Town and the fact that people who helped him now need his help, he'll have none of it. So Roach actually is counseling Thorin, and he said that I will do as you've asked me to. I will send. He's probably, Roach's not going to fly there, but maybe he did. He's going to send ravens to tell Dane to come. But he's telling Thorin also, I'm not saying this is a good thing or a bad thing, but you really need to think about what you're doing here. Let's see, we've got some more questions here, so let's take a look at those. Declan is asking, does the Lord of the Eagles have an official name? Declan, no, he does not in this book. He's just called the Lord of the Eagles. No official name for him. Abigail is wondering if smog disrupted a lot of people. Well, Abigail, he certainly did. He has wiped out the Lonely Mountain when he attacked originally. He wiped out the city of Dale. Those were two very rich towns. And now he's wiped out the entire town of Lake Town. So he has really disrupted an awful lot of people. And Will F is wondering, can the ravens speak more languages? And is this raven significant to the others? Or can all speak to the humans? According to my understanding, dwarves and ravens have a connection with one another, and they can talk to each other. But do notice that Bilbo said that Roach is not speaking bird language. He's actually speaking the language that Bilbo can understand, which would be the common language that everybody's speaking to each other. So whether or not the dwarves and the ravens talk to each other in a special language, I don't know. Let's go ahead and see what happens next. So the ravens tell them that all of the ponies, remember that Smaug drove off and ate some of ate the ponies. Not all of the ponies were eaten. Some of them just broke free and ran around. And all of the supplies sent from Lake Town are still there. So Thorin says, all right, we're going to set up here. So they send some dwarves out to get the ponies and bring back all of the supplies. So now they have a lot more, because remember, they only had a tiny bit of stuff in the tunnel. That was all they had, so that wasn't going to last very long. So now they're situated. They can't stand there for a long time, but they can stand there for a while. The only entrance that is left is the front. Smaug had actually blocked off all the entrances except the entrance that went to the store. The front gate is the thing that's left. The only way anyone can get in. So what Thorin decides to do is that he's going to block up These guys work in stone. They're craftsmen. So they quickly build up a wall to block the gate. And then they only let the running river out. Remember, that's the source. They let it out so that it makes a great big lake in front of this gate that they've just. So I think that they're pretty solid in there now. Nobody's going to really get in and get them. And so what happens next is the people of Lake Town and the elven comes with his elves, and they look up there, and there's Thorin and the company, and they're going like, what? We thought you guys were dead. And this is Thorin's response. Who are you, he called in a very loud voice. They come as if in war to the gates of Thorin, son of Thrain, king under the mountain. And what do you desire? It's like, Thorin, dude, you know who these people are. There's no reason to be so mean. But he was. He is under the influence of wanting to have all this gold, all of this silver, all of this jewels. I mean, the mountain's full of it. And no, who are you people? So the men and the elves were approached the wall, and Bard tells them about the battle, and he tells them that I am actually the one who killed the dragon, and Lake Town needs help. And remember, we helped you when you need help. And Thorin says, no way, this is all my treasure. And then Bard points out, well, a lot of the treasure's from Dale, and like, I'm from Dale, and I'd like my treasure back. I'm the one who killed the dragon. And Thorin goes like, nope, all mine. And then he said, well, remember, we helped you out and provided you with supplies. And Thorin says, yeah, that's right, you did. So I'll tell you what, I'll send back the gold to you to pay for the supplies you gave us. So we're good now. And Bard's going like, no, not really. You know, the entire town is wiped out. We really need help. And Thorin is really, really unhappy to see the Elven King. And he tells Bard point blank, I'm not going to talk to you while the Elven King's around. That guy has got to clear off. I do not like him at all. So let's take a look at what happens next. So they leave, and then they come back. An emissary. An emissary is a person who's like a messenger. So an emissary comes back with a small group, and they have the banner of the Elven King, and they have the banner of the men of Lake Town. And the emissary says, have you changed your mind? Are you going to help us out here? And this was Thorin's answer. Then Thorin seized a bow of horn and shot an arrow at the speaker. It smote into his shield and stuck there quivering. Since such is your answer, he, meaning the speaker, called in return, I declare the mountain besieged. Now, there were a lot of people there, the elves and the men of Dale, and they kind of had the mountain blocked in front of the front gate. Okay, let me check on something here. So everybody, let's put up our journal assignments here, and why don't you take a look at those for just a quick second.
Okay. So just to answer another question, so you guys had asked the question about the official name of the Lord of the Eagles, and he is named. I know she addressed this a little bit before. He is named, but not in the Hobbit. It's really interesting how in the Hobbit, if you notice, very few things are given what seem like official names, Declan, to use your phrase, right? Lots of things are called, like, sometimes we find out that they do have a name, like Esgaroth, right? But it's normally just called Lake Town. Most of the things are just called the things that describe them, like the Elven King, the Lord of the Eagles, Lake Town, the Lonely Mountain, right? Which don't seem like real names at all. which is especially interesting because Tolkien was so good at and interested in names. But this is something you guys have pointed out about a lot of things, and you're right. Even things like Hobbiton, right, which just means town of hobbits, or the river that's right next to so Bilbo's house is on the hill, right, and it's right next to a river. And you remember what the river is called? The Water. Right, it's named the Water. Like, it seems like things in even Rivendell, right? Even Rivendell just means like a valley with a river in it. So that's definitely a pattern. Dale, the town of Dale. Dale means valley, so it's a valley next to the mountain, right? So that's definitely a pattern in The Hobbit, which is a very interesting thing to notice. And there are only a few exceptions to that rule. Anyway, sorry. Just a brief observation.
Thanks for that observation. It's so interesting that somebody who was a professional word person would name something like a river the Water. I've always enjoyed that. Well, for your sketchbooks and your journals, do sketch Roak and make sure you pay attention to the description in the book. And then answer the question, who did Thorin send Roak to for help? And then sketch the camps of the elves and men surrounding the mountain. Now, for this one here, you could pull off and make a really long picture, and show all the camps with the mountain in the background, or you could just really zoom in and just maybe show the elven camp or the men's camp, or the two camps together. So there's lots of fun things that you can do with that. And then the next question is, what was Thorin's answer to Bard? Okay, who did Thorin send Roak to for help? He said, but go especially to my cousin Dane in the Iron Hills, for he has many people well armed and dwells nearest to this place. Bid him hasten. And our next question, what was Thorin's answer to Bard? Then Thorin seized a bow of horn and shot an arrow at the speaker. It smote into his shield and stuck there quivering. That is an answer. Not a very nice one, but an answer. Let's move on to our next chapter. A Thief in the Night. So the mountain is besieged, and the men and the elves think that these guys will eventually run out of food, so they're probably just planning to wait them out. But while everybody's waiting here, they start sorting through the treasure, and Thorin still wants that Arkenstone. And he says, for the Arkenstone of my father, he said, is worth more than a river of gold in itself. And to me, it is beyond price. That stone of all the treasure I name unto myself, and I will be avenged on anyone who finds it and withholds it. So, little Bilbo is going like, oh man, I've got the Arkenstone. And he's got it kind of wrapped up in a bundle, and he uses it that he's been using for a pillow. And so now he's thinking to himself, wow, maybe it wasn't so smart of me to take that. But he doesn't offer it right up either. So they're searching for the Arkenstone. They spend time ordering the treasure, and Roak comes back to tell them that Dane is on his way. He's got 500 well-armed and well-supplied dwarves with him. Oh, nice, thinks the dwarves here. It's like, okay, we have reinforcements coming. Roak then talks to Thorin and says to him, you really need to think this over, because remember, these guys are craftsmen. They didn't farm, and they didn't raise animals for food. They get all their food in trade. And Roak points this out to them. And also, these are your friends. Nope, Thorin wants nothing to do with that. Then Roak tells him, this treasure could be the death of you. And poo-poo to that too. So Bilbo is kind of fed up with this, and he makes a plan. And his plan is this. He decides to sneak out of the encampment inside the Lonely Mountain, and he's going to go down and talk to the elves and the men. So Bombur is on watch, and so he's sitting there talking to Bombur and says, hey, this is what Bilbo says, I can't sleep. I'll take your watch tonight. And Bomber's going like, yeah, that'd be nice because it's cold out here. And so he went inside and slept. What Bilbo does is he takes a rope and he climbs down over the wall and he makes his way to the camps of elves and men. Well, when he was crossing the river, he falls in and makes a splash because remember, he's wearing his invisibility ring because he doesn't want to run into anybody. And he's found because of the noise he's making in the river. So he takes off his ring and they escort him into the camp. And this is what happens. Bilbo was sitting beside a warm fire in front of a large tent, and there too, gazing curiously at him, both the Elven King and Bard. A hobbit in elvish armor, partly wrapped in an old blanket, was something new to them. And I think it was probably something new to Bilbo as well, because he didn't usually wear elvish armor. So he talks to the people, the Bard and the Elven King, and tells them that dwarves are coming from the Iron Hills. And Bard's going like, well, are you threatening us then? And Bilbo said, no. And this is what he says. My dear Bard, squeaked Bilbo, don't be so hasty. I never met such suspicious folk. I am merely trying to avoid trouble for all concerned. Now I will make you an offer. Well, what does he have to offer? Let's take a moment here and take a look at the questions that are coming in. I hope the internet has picked back up again. Find the top of the questions. Okay, here's a question. Do you think Thorin would fight with Dain over the treasure if there wasn't a big war? Thorin was the king, so Dain, even though he was a relative, I don't think that he would have fought over the treasure because Thorin's the king, and whatever the king does is right. Usually. He could have fought with him, I guess, if he was being mean to him. And Will F. is asking, how old were the soldiers of Dain? They were dwarves, and dwarves usually lived a couple of hundred years, so I would imagine that they were probably somewhere in the 75-year-old range to probably 150. They'd be warriors in their prime, capable of carrying large burdens and moving fast. So, anyway, Bilbo then, and I just love these next two pictures. Bilbo whips this out, and you can see here in this picture, here it is glowing, and in this picture, here it is glowing. And just look at the expressions on the faces here. This probably is Bard. This is probably the Elven King since he has a crown. And I think even this guy in the background is kind of like his mouth is open like, oh my gosh. And then this one here is, I'm assuming this is Bard on this side, and this is the Elven King over here. And the Elven King is like, oh my, it's shiny and sparkly. So Bilbo takes this out, probably of his deepest pocket, I don't know, because he was wearing his coat over his mail. This is the Arkenstone of Thrain, said Bilbo, the heart of the mountain, and it is also the heart of Thorin. He values it above a river of gold. Remember, Thorin just said that. He values it above a river of gold. I give it to you. It will aid you in your bargaining. Because, remember, things are kind of like at a stalemate right now. The dwarves have everything blocked up. The men and elves can't get in. Thorin is refusing to talk to them. They really don't have any power right now except to wait them out. And then, and I really like this part as well, but how is it yours to give? He, meaning Bard, asked at last with an effort. Oh, well, said the Hobbit, it isn't, he was uncomfortable. It isn't exactly, but, well, I'm willing to let it stand against all my claim, don't you know? So one of the things that Bilbo does here in the camp is he takes out the letter from Thorin that spells out that he gets 1/14 share of the profits of this expedition. And he shows that to him, saying, I have 1/4 share of this is mine. But I will accept this as my 1/14 share, and I give it to you. So that's kind of where they are now. So Bilbo does give them the stone, and they go ahead and accept it. And then the Elven King says to Bilbo, you don't want to go back there. I know more about dwarves than you do, and you don't want to go back there because they're not going to be nice to you. And Bilbo says, these are my friends. We've come a long way together. We've been through a lot. I'm not going to abandon them now. And so they say, okay, then, and make plans for him, give him an escort to go back. But before he leaves the camp of elves and men, all of a sudden this old man shows up and reveals himself, and it's Gandalf. So apparently Gandalf finished whatever business he was on because he's back. And he says to Bilbo, you did the right thing here. You gave them the Arkenstone as a bargaining thing. That was the right thing to do, Bilbo. And he also says that he has news that no one, not even the ravens, has heard yet. But he doesn't tell Bilbo what it is. I don't know if he was telling the Elven King and Bard. That's not mentioned. But he has news, and he doesn't tell him what it is. So the Elven King and Bard provide Bilbo a safe escort back as close as they can get to. And Bilbo gets back, he climbs back in with his rope, he stows his rope, and then he goes and wakes up Bombur because the watch is just about over. And then he goes into the corner and curls up and goes to sleep. And that's where we leave this chapter. Let's take a look at their questions. Lolly or Iali, I can't tell if that's an L or an I. Why do they want the treasure? Is it just greed, or do they want to buy something? I'm not sure who you mean there. The elves and the men have different reasons for wanting the treasure. The men want the treasure so that they can rebuild their cities. Their city's been wiped out by Smaug. They need that money to help them rebuild. The Elven King, however, was really interested in treasure for a different reason. He had not gotten as much treasure as Elven Kings of old had, so he wanted to go there and have some treasure just so he could have more treasure. And the dwarves, if you're referring to them, the dwarves inside the Lonely Mountain, they wanted the treasure because that dragon sickness was on them, that it just made them greedy. And most of the dwarves were in agreement with Thorin that nobody should get any of this treasure except the dwarves. Yeah, they were willing to pay for the help that the Lake Town men provided, but that's all. And remember, Bard said to them, the treasure of Dale is in there as well, and I'm from Dale, and I want my treasure back, because after all, I'm the one who killed the dragon. So I hope that answers your question. And Willap has another question. When did the Goblin Wars take place? Because the soldiers of Dane were in the war. You are absolutely correct about that. And actually, this is a question that every time I have taught The Hobbit, someone would ask about that. And yes, there were Goblin Wars. And yes, they were based around Thorin's family. Thorin's family, his grandfather, Thor, one people who drew the map, went off and tried to take back a kingdom that had been taken over by goblins. And the goblins actually murdered him. And so that murdering the High King like that really upset most of the dwarves. And so they went there and fought this really bad battle. And it was a horrible battle. Lots and lots and lots and lots of dwarves were killed. And Dane was very young, and Thorin was very young, but they both went to that battle as well. And Dane actually is the one who killed the great goblin chieftain of that area, whose name was Azog. Dane was the one who actually took him out. And he was very young, and he was very famous for that afterwards. Thorin was very famous because during the battle, his shield was ruined. And so instead of giving up in the battle, he grabbed a piece of wood, a limb off of an oak tree, and used that as a shield. And that's why they called him Oaken Shield, because he survived the battle by using the oak as a shield. And you can actually read about that in the appendices of the Fellowship of the Ring. And then there's another place, I think it is, and we'll have to ask Dr. Olson because I can't remember which book it's in, where they talk about that, and it's called the Battle of Azanulbazar. Hope I said that right. And this is the question you've asked there, Will, is a question that seriously, I have taught this book numerous times, and that question comes up every single time. So that is not exactly in our story of the Hobbit, and I'm trying to concentrate on the Hobbit, but it's a fair question. So hopefully that will help you to understand what that battle was, and also give you the other sources of where you can find more information if you want. Jubilee has a question about the Elven King. What would the Elven King have done with the treasure if he was able to have a share of it? Well, he just wanted it to have it because I kind of think he just liked pretty things. He seemed to be fairly wealthy because they didn't have to grow crops and things like that. We know that the elves hunted because that's how the dwarves and the company found them when they were lost in Mirkwood. So they could get food that way by hunting, but also they had stuff coming up to them from Lake Town, and they would ship things up there. And we know that they had apples and wine in the barrels that they shipped up. They probably had other things like either flour or bread or things like that, and all sorts of goods. Could be cloth and those kind of things. And so there was a trade going on between the two of them. So apparently the Elven King had enough money to buy that without worrying about it. But basically, he just wanted to have more treasure, simply to have it. He liked sparkly white stones, that's mentioned. But I don't think that he was actually going to do anything with it, just have it in the bank. Well, let's take a look at our journal activities. The first one is to sketch Bilbo with the Arkenstone in the camp of the elves and the men. Remember, he never really took it out after he found it and put it in his deepest pocket. He takes it out and shows it to the elves and the men, or actually to the Elven King and to Bard. So that's what I want you to do, is get inspired by your reading and the pictures we've seen and show us what that looked like. Answer the question, why did Bilbo take the Arkenstone to the elves and the men? Your next sketch is Bilbo in that elven armor. What does your mind movie show you whenever you think about the description? And there's little Bilbo in this princely, because it was made for an elven prince, this beautiful armor. What did he look like? Remember, he thought he looked pretty grand, but he also thought he looked ridiculous. And then answer the question, whom did Bilbo meet in the camp? So let's take a look at our sources here. Why did Bilbo take the Arkenstone to the camp of the elves and men? He, meaning Thorin, values it above a river of gold. I give it to you. It will aid you in your bargaining. So use that to answer the question. And then, whom did Bilbo meet at the camp? Here's our quote. Well done, Mr. Baggins, he said, clapping Bilbo on the back. There is always more about you than anyone expects. It was Gandalf. checking to see if there's any more questions. Amy has a question. Was everyone in this battle? Well, Amy, tomorrow we are going to only be talking about one chapter, chapter 17, The Clouds Burst, and we're going to be talking about the battle then. So I'm going to hold off on your question about who was in the battle. And we will be talking about that with maps. And so if you have any questions after you've read chapter 17, make sure you hold on to them, because it's really fascinating the way Tolkien describes the battle. So I think we are at the end of our discussion for today. And do take it, if you have a chance, take some time and go over chapter 17. And then I'll see you guys tomorrow.
Okay, very good. Excellent. One really brief thing I'd like to comment, just to kind of add about that you guys were talking about today, is the dragon sickness stuff.
Yes.
Yeah, that's such an important thing, and it's. I know in some ways it's a little bit hard to understand, but basically this is Tolkien working with a traditional fairy tale idea. And sort of legendary idea. You see, there are some stories that suggest that where dragons actually came from was people like having lots of treasure and thinking greedy thoughts about the treasure, and it actually turns them into a dragon. In Norse mythology, for instance, that's where Fafnir, the great and first dragon, came from. He was just a greedy guy who turned into a dragon, and the dragon shape was sort of the outward showing of his inner greediness, right? So that's kind of what Tolkien is showing here, right? As Thorin, on the one hand, Thorin wanted to get his treasure back, as we said at the beginning, right? The whole point of the adventure was go back and get the treasure that the dragon stole from us. And the dragon was the bad guy, right? I mean, he took the treasure belonged to the dwarves, that was all good, right? He's just, they're just recovering what was theirs. And yet, when he does it, right? When they accomplish their quest and all their wishes come true, he finds there's Thorin sitting on all the treasure and thinking greedy thoughts, and he is becoming dragonish in his whole perspective, right? And that's where we see, as you guys were talking about earlier today, the really rude stuff that Thorin does and says to Bard and to the others when they come in. It's not good for him to be acting like that, right? He's acting not like the rightful king of the dwarves. That's what Roach wants him to act. That's why Roach objects to it, right? He wants him to act more like a traditional dwarven king, and instead he's acting more like a dragon, which is what makes Bilbo's action of going and giving up the Arkenstone. Because remember, even Bilbo, what was the first thing Bilbo did when he found the treasure unattended, right? He took something for himself, the Arkenstone, the most precious thing of all, and he's been hiding it in his pocket. But everyone else is focused on the treasure and trying to get the treasure and being willing to fight for the treasure. And there's Bilbo, right, who is the only one who comes and gives up the treasure in order to establish peace. So that's a really, really big deal, right? Okay, so I'll let you guys go. But yeah, so yes, Jubilee, just chapter 17 tomorrow. So there are 19, we have 10 days and 19 chapters. So there was always going to be one day in which we only did one chapter. Tomorrow is the day. And chapter 17 is a pretty big deal. Anyway, so there's plenty to read and to talk about and to think about for chapter 17 all by itself. So we will see you guys tomorrow at our normal time and talk about chapter 17. Thanks, everybody.
Bye-bye.
Bye.